Oh, are you frozen?
Oh, shoot.
You look frozen. Yeah, you do seem frozen. Either that or standing very still.
I think my Wi-Fi is not working.
What's good? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Newest Olympian. My name is Mike Schubert. I'm the titular Newest Olympian. I'm a 32-year-old man who never read the Percy Jackson books as a kid, but I read them as an adult because I was on a quest to determine if it was a book series that society had been sleeping on. I said yes, and now I'm checking in on the Heroes of Olympus series as well. And I'm joined today by someone who you may have heard and seen and heard but didn't realize because of background production tinkerings of sorts. Ooh, the ghost within the podcast.
I'm the podcast ghost.
Yes, hey, it's Sherry Guo. Sherry, how's it going?
Good. I'm still, soaking in the feeling of being on stage last week because this episode will be the one directly following that. And, it feels great to have fans.
Yeah, look, the people love Sherry, and I can't blame the people because you're fantastic. And whether it's editing stuff or running the merch table or doing the Q&A at the live show, you're killing it on all fronts. So I'm very excited to have you on for these chapters, which you called dibs on many, many moons ago.
Yes.
And I was confused as to why. And I think I know why now you've picked them. And if it's the reason I think it is, it's perfect. But I think we should wait until my actual guess. But I'm pretty sure I know why you have chosen these.
These are my favorite chapters in this book because, I don't know, for me, the second book just wasn't that memorable compared to the rest for this series.
Oh, interesting.
Same with the first series. In both series, the second book is just kind of for me.
I can see it for Sea of
These chapters
Monsters.
Specifically, I'm obsessed with this one character.
Oh, so it's actually about the chapters. There's one particular line that I thought was the reason why you picked it.
There is one particular line.
Okay.
But it's also the character.
Also the chapters. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, also
we'll
the
get
chapters.
into them. I believe if we have the time, we will be covering chapters 21 through 24. So the full 4-franc gauntlet. We'll see if we can get through it, but they're short enough that I think we can make it happen. Though, since you have now guested on the show, since we've come up with the new question, let's do the new question. If you had a riptide that was an inanimate object that turned into a different inanimate object, since we are just humans and not demigods, what would your more practical riptide be?
It would either be a hair tie or claw clip.
Smart.
It would be one of those that turns into my film camera because it's so heavy and annoying to lug around. Whenever I want to take a picture, I never have it with me. And then when I carry it around, I forget I have it. But if I could just, transform something into it, I wouldn't have to lug this thing around because it kind of is annoying to lug a camera around. It hits your hip and then your bag is heavy for no reason. And then you have to be careful with the water bottle in case something spills. So yeah, it'd be my film camera.
I totally get this because I used to have a big clunky camera. I used to have a Canon 60D from when I did YouTube videos in high school. And those were big and thick, especially because I bought it in 2013. And I would bring it on hikes when I was in Seattle and it was so heavy. It was so heavy, but I was when I get to the top, it'll be great. And I remember I would always get to the top of the hike and take all these photos and then not look at it until, months later, be let me look at all the photos on my SD card. And they never looked as good as my eyes.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things where it's I don't think it could ever capture it. Meanwhile, I brought it on every hike. I went hiking every weekend when it wasn't rainy season. Now I have a Sony that's a lot smaller, so that's a lot lighter to bring around. But I also recently acquired my dad's old film camera. He's got this old Minolta from the 80s.
Yeah.
And
mine is my parents from the 90s.
Hell yeah, see? So it was in my closet, and I was what's in this bag? That was in my childhood closet that my parents are now using for storage. And he's oh, it's this old camera. And I was what? So now I have it. I know nothing about film camera stuff, but I've bothered a friend of mine who does know film camera stuff. And maybe I'll have to bother you as well. But I've got the basic knowledge now of my friend. They showed me at least what all the knobs and stuff do. So we're getting there.
The first time I used my film camera, my friend also showed me how to do it. The one thing I didn't pay attention to was how to load the film. So the second roll I ever shot, because my friend loaded the first roll for me, I didn't load it correctly. So I brought it to the shop and I'm wait a minute.
Yeah.
It didn't take any pictures.
Shout out to my friend Wendy who did let me know.
But, lesson learned.
Yeah, look, you live and you learn. And I'm hopeful that the lessons that I received from my bud allowed me to not make any mistakes. I'm sure I will make plenty of them. But let's get into these chapters of The Heroes of Olympus, second installment, The Son of Neptune, which I have found to be quite memorable. So I'm surprised that you're saying it didn't stand out. But I do know that like the later books are such bangers that maybe that's why.
Well, my history with the Heroes of Olympus is like questionable.
Okay.
I never read the full series all the way through, like when they were coming out. I read up through half of Mark of Athena, gave up because I was like, I can't wait every year because I read the first series all at once. And something about the Son of Neptune in particular, I think it might have been the year it came out was just like the worst year of my life. It was 7th grade.
The worst year of
I moved
everyone's
to a new
life.
state. I was living in Florida, so like that's all you need to know.
You lived in Florida?
I lived in Miami, Florida for a year. It was horrible. I'm never going back to Florida after that. Brutal. Like worst year ever. But yeah, the books couldn't even get me through. That's when I fell into my dance moms phase. And something about this book, I think it was because of all the Roman stuff. I was just like, I'm not learning this new vocabulary. Why is everything in italics? I don't care for this. And it was just too difficult with the vocabulary.
I love
And then last night I like skimmed the chapters between the ones I just finished editing and then these because we're at a weird phase where you're so ahead that I'm not caught up.
Yeah.
Even though usually I am way more than like the listeners are.
Right.
And there are a lot of good jokes in this book that I just simply do not remember from when I was a kid.
It's funny. The humor has come back. Percy as the narrator, obviously funny. Frank even has some jokes and stuff. Hazel from time to time. We've got 3 people with comedic chops. And yes, for context, we're recording this on December 11th. And I don't know when this one's coming out. I'd have to look at the calendar. But we are quite far in
months.
the future. It will be months. Which, yeah, it's an interesting spot where like, especially when we're doing the live shows, it's a very different situation of like, here's what we're covering. And it's far ahead from where the podcast is. For anyone that is confused, I always post it on Instagram like the week of the show. But also what was funny is like, I finally just posted this week, we posted the episode where you get the Nico reveal. And people are like, oh, I'm so excited you're finally at the Nico reveal. I'm like, I've known Nico as Hazel's brother for years now at this point. But that's just the nature of how the recordings have gone. And we are going to continue on and begin this episode with chapter 21, which is called Franca, which of course we will retitle by the end. When we last left our heroes, ding-dongs were being thrown at monster armies that then departed. So they're deciding, okay, maybe we should go into this store because our good friend Percy looks like he is going to die. So this chapter opens with, quote, Frank hated ding-dongs, he hated snakes, and he hated his life. Not necessarily in that order. And it's been a minute since Frank has been narrating. We got to touch base with our friend Frank here. We've got a lot to unpack because first and foremost, how can you hate ding-dongs? They're delicious. What's wrong with you?
I've actually never had any Hostess snacks.
Oh, I was never a big Hostess snack guy because growing up in New Jersey, I always had Drake's stuff. So Drake's, yeah, it's very regional. But Drake's, let me pull it up because I always had Krimpets. I don't know if Krimpets or Drake's. I think those might be Tasty Cakes. Yeah, I think Krimpets was the big one I had. Krimpets are Tasty Cakes.
These all sound like made up words to me.
It's also Northeast regional. I feel like Tasty Cake is very Philly, Pennsylvania inspired, and being in Central Jersey, you get a lot of that. So Butterscotch Krimpets are Tasty Cakes, and they're what I had almost every day at snack time at my K through 8 school, which was awesome. Drake's, they do Yodels, which I think is one of their more popular ones. They do Devil Dogs. They do little crumb cakes. But those are the ones that I was more familiar with. I was never a big Hostess, because what even is Hostess? Hostess is like Twinkies.
All I know is Twinkies.
I don't know that I've ever had a Twinkie. Oh, they do the donuts.
I've never had a Twinkie, but one time we almost got stopped we did get stopped at the airport because my mom forgot to take out sunscreen in her carry-on, and it was like a giant bottle, but at security, someone had left a Twinkie on the conveyor belt, and the TSA agent was like, is that Twinkie yours? And my mom was so offended by the fact that she'd be carrying a Twinkie for some reason.
So ding-dongs are, as we explained in the live show thing, they're just kind of like cupcakey, filled with cream sort of things. But yeah, I was never a big Hostess guy, but what I did love, Little Debbie's. That is
the muffins?
My weakness.
Oh, wait. Is that No, the muffins
Little Debbie's
are
is like so many things. Yeah. The
Little Debbie's are
good.
the oatmeal cakes.
Oatmeal cream pies. They have so many. Cosmic brownies.
Yeah, Cosmic Brownie. Those
Nutty
I had
Buddies,
all the time.
Zebra cakes. The thing with Little Debbie's is that my parents would never get them for me as a kid because they were unhealthy. Somehow Butterscotch
I only
Krimpets,
ever got them from trading.
Yes. Butterscotch Krimpets were deemed okay, but Little Debbie's was too unhealthy. Star Crunch, so I would always be trading. And the good thing about Butterscotch Krimpets is they come in a thing of two, so I could sometimes trade like one of them for something else, and I would still be able to get some Krimpet and get something else. But yeah, I would only ever get Little Debbie's through trading, and now I only get them when I am on tour and I go grocery shopping because I'm an adult and I can buy my own thing now. And when I go to grocery stores at non-New York places and it's pretty cheap, I will snag a box of oatmeal cream pies or Nutty Buddies or whatever, and it's a good time. It's a good time. I'm living my childhood I did not have as an adult. When I'm like, I can go to the grocery store and I can pay $3
I can
for
buy
this.
my own snacks.
But then I'm like, oh God, my cholesterol. I gotta make sure I'm okay. Can't eat it too much. Anyway, this is a Percy Jackson podcast, so I don't know how he doesn't like ding dongs. So Frank continues. He says that he wishes he could just pass out like Hazel and be transported to another time, like a time when his dad wasn't Mars. And he's still hung up about this, we're learning.
I mean, I would be too.
Yeah, I mean,
Ares is not a good dad.
No, and we got to see if when he's Mars, he's a little bit better. I feel like he had better vibes in the brief Mars introduction that we had as opposed to Ares, but still kind of that same sort of punk attitude. So I can see why he's not stoked about it, but I do feel like Frank could maybe give him a chance a little bit more. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, but I definitely am not a fan of Ares' vibe in general, so I don't think I'll ever warm up to him. But maybe Frank will. I can't say anything.
Thank you, Trapdoor Intact. It just feels like Frank is a passive, like he's a lover, not a fighter. So I think he doesn't want to be a son of Mars, but maybe he'll come to an appreciation for it. We'll just have to see how it develops. But he doesn't like being reminded of this with the spear. He doesn't want to use it. He thinks Mars is a moron for calling it a real man's weapon. So he thinks, I'll just be using my bow from here on out. Haha, we'll see how that goes, Frank. He wonders if there's a DNA test that he can take because maybe there was a mix-up at the Godly Nursery, which I think is a funny joke. And it does make me think of the episode when I was talking about how Piper got her name and they were talking about Grandpa Tom coming up with the name and Tristan and all that. And I was making reference because I had just recently gone through the delivery process of a baby and going through the delivery room and the hospital and everything. And then many people pointed out, I don't think it was a traditional birth, Mike. I don't think Aphrodite was in the ER.
Certainly not.
Yeah, it's a good point.
She just snapped her fingers and then Piper appeared.
Baby, here, come up with a name. But like still, like they would have to go to some sort of place to get her birth. That's got to be a wild conversation. How do you take the spawn of a goddess and get her birth certificate and everything? Like that's got to be wild. I get.
Chiron's got some file folder somewhere. He's just like writing them.
You would hope that like Hermes comes through with the delivery of a birth certificate that works for whatever state they are in, because that would cause so many problems if Piper didn't have a proper birth certificate. You need those for so many things in America. So many things.
So many things. But also, can't you just lie that a birth certificate is yours? There's no picture on them. That's what I've never understood about the IDs in the US. They're all just like cards with letters and words and numbers.
Yeah, but I guess they have the particular seals and imprints and signatures and stuff on them that I think they would be very hard to forge. Like it would be hard to get the particular paper, the cardstock, the seal, like all that kind of stuff. Yes, there's no photo with it. Look, I'm no counterfeiter, but I don't know how you go about getting all of those sorts of things. But maybe it is easier than others because you don't need the photo. I don't know. Driver's license stuff, that seems impossible because I've gotten a new driver's license and like the amount of detail that is in that to make it fake, I don't know how college kids are doing it these days to get fake IDs because there's so much going on with those IDs now, which I guess are like much more rampant in terms of trying to fake, which is why they're probably so much harder to fake. So Frank cannot believe that his mom would get involved with Aries, and I at least wrote in my notes, Frank being ripped makes more sense now that his dad is Aries/Mars. Then Frank recalls his grandmother saying that his mom was a born warrior, and thus her courting a god wasn't surprising, especially given their family history of princes and heroes. But Frank thinks that he cannot be either, as he is just a lactose-intolerant klutz who couldn't even save his friend from being kidnapped by a bunch of wheat. He doesn't even want to be proud of his new medals, as he feels like he only got them because Mars pressured Raina into giving them to him. And I disagree. I feel like Frank earned these. He really showed
he
his
really
prowess.
led the team.
Yes, he put the team on his back.
It was his idea for Percy to use his water powers.
Right.
And for Hazel to tunnel stuff.
Mm-hmm. I feel like he earned those fair and square. So don't sell yourself short, Frank. He finds it hard to believe that his friends have not ditched him yet, as Percy clearly hates Mars, and Hazel keeps looking at him like she's afraid that he'll, quote, turn into a muscle-bound freak. And I wrote in my notes, does Frank not know that he's jacked? And then literally the next line from narrative Frank is, quote, Frank looked down at his body. Correction, even more of a muscle-bound freak, with more in italics.
So he's like, I'm jacked, but not in the right way.
I'm ripped, but like maybe I'll be more ripped. Which like there is a difference between muscular and so muscular you worry about someone's personality. Like if you're too ripped, you got to think like, all this person does is go to the gym and pound supplements. Maybe they don't have a personality to match it. So I kind of get what he's getting at.
But Hazel clearly likes you, so whatever.
I mean, yeah, dude, like don't.
But they're teenagers. They can't read signals. Not that I can either. But who can these days?
No one. So he thinks that he might just stay in Alaska to avoid the god that he's supposed to return home to. He thinks of his grandma saying that Zhang men don't whine. Multiple people wrote in to let me know that it's not Zhang, it's Zhang, almost like a J and then a long A. Do you have experience more in pronouncing this last name? Is that more correct?
Yes. However, with the caveat that my Mandarin is pretty bad.
Okay.
I can understand it, but like speaking it, like I can hear the sounds in my head. The mouth doesn't want to make the sounds anymore.
Sure.
But yeah, that's closer. However, I feel like it's like the same thing with like when people pronounce like other European names in English. I've just always defaulted to Zhang because I feel like it sounds a little bit weird to be like speaking in English and then like accent, like how people sometimes insist on saying croissant and I'm like, we're in the US, please call it a croissant.
This is how I felt when I was going to Australia and on tour they were telling me that I shouldn't call the city Melbourne, I should call it like Melbourne, almost like it's spelled
like in the Australian
Melbin. Yeah, and I was like, this sounds like I'm doing a caricature. I guess in a different language it makes more sense if you're doing it authentically. So I don't feel as weird trying to say Zhang here because it's like more correct with the actual other language. But when it's English, like it would be like if I was talking about London and they were like, oh no, you shouldn't say London, you should say like London. Like yeah, like
I'm not gonna become British halfway through the sentence.
Exactly. So yeah, but at the same time I do find it interesting, and this is just like me only knowing one language and not even learning anything besides Latin, which I took in high school. But I do find it fun when people who speak Spanish and English and they don't have any sort of accent when they speak English. It is fun when they're, saying like, oh yeah, I was visiting my relatives down in Buenos Aires. And it's like, okay, you mean Buenos Aires? Like, or talking about like, oh yeah, I visited my family down in Colombia. It's like, you mean Colombia? It's hard because it's like, you're right. There is like the way it is more said in English, but it's less correct. But then it sounds like you're trying too hard. So I get it.
I'm no authority on this because I just Anglicanize everything. But that's also because the tones in Mandarin are really hard.
That's what I've heard.
I have never been able to distinguish very well between the second and third. Luckily, my last name is neither of those. But even still, I pronounce my own last name wrong so much. It's quite embarrassing, but also I'm like, they're hard. Like, it's really hard to hear them.
I do not envy my friends who have to speak languages like this, where it's just like your English brain cannot tell your throat and mouth what to do. I had a roommate who was Pakistani and his name is Omar, but like the way you actually say Omar, he'd said it. And to me, the closest I can get is saying like Umar, but like I know that's not correct. And he was my roommate for an entire year. And like every couple of days I'd be like, is this right? And he's like, no. I just tried so hard. It's tough.
At a certain point, I'm like, please stop trying. Like, it's okay to mispronounce it. I mispronounce my own name. I will not be offended. Because in elementary school, they tried so hard, but not that hard because they tried really hard in English.
Gotcha.
Like they weren't trying to pronounce it in Mandarin. They were just like, is it guo, guo, goo? And I was like, I don't care. Just say guo.
Is there like a, if you tried to say it more correct than guo, like how would you say it?
I feel like it'd be like guo.
Oh,
But I don't see.
okay.
I don't think I have the tone. Like I don't think there was tone in that.
Okay.
It's like GWUH. I feel like is the best way to Anglicanize it. But
Okay.
like I just can't do the tones right.
Okay, cool. This makes me feel better about sticking to guo. Anyway, let's talk about Percy Jackson. So Frank thinks of his grandmother saying that Zhang men don't whine. Frank realizes that she's right. He has a job to do, and currently the next step in that job is to get to the store. Great transition, Frank. Let's get into what's happening. So they get very close. They don't see any of the snakes from before when Polybides took them out of his hair, but then he hears a hiss, and Frank yells for the other two to go, and he fires an arrow that he thought was an explosive arrow, but instead it's just a flare arrow, and it does still allow him to see what the snake looks like. The snake looks at it as it goes by, and Frank can tell that this snake is about the size of his arm with a mane made out of spiky white fins, so feels very terrifying.
Also kind of cute though.
Yeah, weird. Yeah, I could see it.
I could see
got
this
a
as
cute
a little
mane,
plushie.
little lion vibes.
It's only the size of your arm.
Mm-hmm. You know, Frank, he's buff, so is it thick? How tall is Frank? I don't know if we have Frank's height, so yeah, it could be cute, but also could be terrifying. Small scary thing, as we get into later in these chapters, can be more terrifying than big scary thing.
Yeah.
This snake focuses its gaze on Frank and inches towards him. Grass dies around the snake wherever it touches, which I think is a cool effect. And then Frank hears the other two heroes reach the steps of the store, and the snake begins to shoot out fire, making him worry about his stick that's keeping him alive and cannot catch fire, otherwise he might die. The snake jumps at him. He only has enough time to swing his bow at it. He can't notch a whole arrow, but it does work. And Frank is feeling very proud until he realizes that his bow is disintegrating. So, tick-tock, it's spear o'clock. He hears all three snakes hiss in anger, and then he joins the others at the store, and he sees the snake torching the hillside, but keeping a distance from the store itself. Frank says that they're never going to make it out of here, so Hazel suggests that they go inside. And the door says, Rainbow Organic Foods and Lifestyle. So my thought initially is, oh, okay, this is going to be like a Whole Foods of sorts. You've got your big bulk nuts and grains and stuff, and that's basically exactly what's described when they go inside, but it also has trinkets, things like crystals and all sorts of more hippy-dippy stuff like that.
Yes. Very, very West Coast.
Totally. Very granola crunchy vibes. Very Berkeley Bowl coated. They go inside, the lights turn on, flute music begins to play, and one thing that gets described, there's merchandise, like they have clothes, and Frank, as the narrator, describes a Tinkerbell type dress that is gauzy, but with a Z. Did he mean gaudy? Gauzy? Is that a thing?
I feel like it is. Like there's a certain fabric that looks kind of like mummy-esque.
Oh, okay. Because all I could think of was literal gauze, but yes, gauzy, and now there's a bunch of like fabrics of it. It just means like, as you're
I
saying,
feel like very, like hippy-dippy, homemade, natural stuff.
like a thinner than linen, like if you have a linen shirt kind of vibe.
Yeah, and it looks kind of unfinished and a little like raggedy, but like that's the look.
Right. One of those things where when you see someone in online shopping wearing it, you're like, oh yeah, and then you try to put it on and you're like, it looks like I'm wearing a blanket.
Yeah, or like bandages.
Yeah, true. I mean, literal gauze. So Percy is looking rough. He asks to sit down and maybe for some water. Yeah, can we get the Son of Neptune water, please? A girl then pops up from behind granola bins and asks if they need help. Frank is obviously scared, and he's so scared that he knocks over a fountain of Neptune. He tries to clean up the mess and almost gooses the girl with his spear. Is goosing a term for cutting someone?
I don't know.
Goosing is a verb that means to poke between the buttocks with an upward thrust. Ah, I guess that's part of the process in carving a goose. So, okay. That could have been scary. That's new. Look how much we're learning. Look at that. Thank you, Uncle Rick.
Also, this is so funny. The image of like just a decapitated Neptune rolling next to a very ill Percy.
So funny.
Percy must be like, what's happening, Dad?
Right. Hazel looks mortified. Percy looks sick as he now gazes upon the statue of his recently decapitated father.
He's finally experiencing seasickness.
Yeah. I mean, that was the joke earlier, right? Or did we make that joke?
I think you made it on stage.
I made some sort of seasickness joke. Or no, it was just how they could believe that Hazel would be this seasick because Percy's never experienced it. So yeah, he's like land sick. This is his version of seasickness. Now, this girl claps her hands and the broken statue just turns into mist. She ensures Frank that it's okay because those statues bum her out anyway since they're so grumpy looking. And as Frank describes her, she basically has the vibes of a college-aged hiker girl, which very Pacific Northwest, I can certainly understand, relate, and I can envision exactly what she looks like.
I've met this person.
Oh, yes. Oh, 100%. And her shirt on it says ROFL for Rainbow Organic Foods and Lifestyles. And I did not pick up on that being the acronym when it first was written on the door. Rick making a ROFL joke.
Yeah.
Way to go,
It had
Uncle
to be
Rick.
intentional.
Oh, I mean, given the later joke that comes that I cannot believe he actually made, it's certainly intentional. And I'm pulling out now my copy of the Son of Neptune paperback to see exactly when this book came out. But I want to say it's like 2011. Yep, text copyright 2011. I mean, yeah. ROFL 2011? Mm-hmm. Yeah, dude. Like, that's the time. That is the time for a ROFL joke to come through. So she looks young, but she has white frizzy hair. Frank tries to focus on speaking, but struggles to do so because her irises keep changing color. So of course at first I'm thinking, is this iris straight up? Frank apologizes for destroying the fountains. The hiker girl says it's all good and that the demigods are welcome to browse, as all demigods are. She says monsters just want to use the bathroom and not buy anything, but demigods might actually get stuff. Her eyes flash with lightning, and then Frank locks eyes with Hazel to make sure that he didn't just imagine this, and yeah, seems like she also picked up on this. But then there's a voice from the back. It addresses this girl as Fleecy and tells her to bring the demigods to the back. So I'm thinking, okay, that's Iris. This is not Iris. She was just identified as a different person. Frank asks, is that really your name? And Fleecy says, well, my real name is pronounced in the language of the nebulae like this, and then just makes a bunch of cackling thunderstorm noises, but then says, you can call me Fleecy. And this feels like I don't know if you've seen the movie Galaxy Quest when they meet the aliens and they have like a really standard, quick, short name. And then it's like, our name is like, blah, blah, and like make
I
a
think
bunch
I've
of
seen
mouth
a
noises.
clip of that circulating somewhere.
It's a good one. I remember watching it a lot in tennis camp. It was an old, reliable one, and it was pretty funny. Good Alan Rickman role. Good stuff for him. So Percy Jackson then mutters, nebulae, cloud nymphs. And I like that even in this state, he is contributing with his innate knowledge that just regurgitates out of his body from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
Fleecy's very excited because few people ever know about cloud nymphs. So she then ushers them to the back so that her boss can get him fixed up. They go down the produce aisle, which includes a bunch of produce such as lotus fruits and pomegranates, which feels incredibly thematic and intentional. Then narrator Frank says, quote, at the back of the store behind a counter with an old-fashioned cash register stood a middle-aged woman with olive skin, long black hair, rimless glasses, and a t-shirt that read, the goddess is alive. She wore amber necklaces and turquoise rings. She smelled like rose petals. Narrator Frank continues that she looks friendly, but for some reason she has Frank on the verge of tears, and then it hits him. She reminds him of his mother. She introduces herself as Iris. Then Hazel goes, not the Iris, the rainbow goddess. And here's my question, Hazel. If you knew that Iris was the rainbow goddess, and there was a magical store that had rainbows showing up and zapping away enemies, how did you not at any point think or suggest, I wonder if this is Iris, the rainbow goddess? That is wild to me.
Also, she's wearing a shirt that says the goddess is alive.
Yeah, like, come on.
All the clues were there.
I get that she's 13. And at 13, I was not necessarily the smartest or most astute person, but come on. But like, that's ridiculous that she didn't bring this up at all.
Actually, no, I am Hades.
I get that it's a book and we're trying to do plot twist stuff for people who aren't grown men reading the book and able to immediately know this is going to be the Iris store when you see a rainbow. But gosh, Hazel, you think you might have brought this up earlier. Iris says that The rainbow goddessness is her official job, but she doesn't define herself by her corporate identity. 1, based Iris. 2, this is actually a good response. I'm trying to champion the default question in life not being, what do you do for work? Because not everyone is fortunate enough to have a job that they actually like. So I feel like the default question, instead of like, oh, what do you do for work, should be, oh, what do you do for fun? So I like saying, I don't define myself by my corporate identity as a way to be like, don't ask me about my job if you don't like your job. I'm lucky. I like my job, but not everybody does.
But also, I like the image of Zeus being like corporate daddy, and Iris is like, I refuse to deal with this bureaucracy. I'm doing my own thing with rainbows.
Look, it tracks. Zeus wears a pinstripe suit. He is business dad.
Especially in this whole series, he's like, we're not talking to our kids anymore because it's not going to work out for us.
Business dad.
Restructuring the company.
Oh, God. Now it's just Succession, but with the gods. So Iris says that in her free time, she runs the ROFL co-op. And I wrote in my notes, is Rick making a ROFLcopter joke? And this will go one level further, which I am floored. There have been many questions that I want to ask Uncle Rick if I ever get him on the podcast. But particularly some of the choices in this book in the Heroes of Olympus series, mainly the ROFL stuff and the crispy cheese and wieners.
Yeah.
I might, if I ever get to fully, truly interview him, which TBD if that ever happens, aside from the little thing that we had him on for the TV show episodes before. If I ever truly get like a proper interview with him, it's going to be deranged and unhinged because I will be like crispy cheese. Like I'm going to have to open with crispy cheese and wieners, I feel like. A ROFL? Like, were you trying to look like a cool dad for your son? Because I guess his son was of the age of liking ROFL at the time this book came out. Wow. Wild. Anyway, ROFL co-op. Ridiculous. She mentions that it promotes a healthy lifestyle. Frank brings up the ding-dong throwing, and Iris corrects that they are not ding-dongs. They are gluten-free, no sugar-added, vitamin-enriched, soy-free, goat and milk seaweed-based cupcake simulations. And then Fleecy adds, all natural. And you know what? Good. We love a junk food that is not as bad for you as it could be.
But if it's a simulation, is it natural?
Ooh, I guess they meant like a facsimile, like I guess in the sense of like imitation cupcake.
Not just like, oh, it's cardboard.
It's
it might
air.
taste like cardboard with gluten-free, no sugar.
It's that holographic food from that one episode of SpongeBob or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Very much giving the energy of like 2010s vegan foodies on their blogs who were like, just cook everything in water only, no salts, no seasonings. You'll feel so much better.
Yeah, definitely feels like a commentary of that. And especially when, and I think this might be a little bit later. I think a later thing is just because something is gluten-free, it's healthy, which is like not the case. I think there's certain health trend kind of things that I think now we're recognizing that just because something is X-free doesn't mean that it's good. I was surprised that soy-free was mentioned because 2011 feels like, if something's made out of soy, it's healthy. Whereas like soy actually isn't necessarily the best for you. So soy-free getting in there, I was like, ooh, Uncle Rick knows what he's talking about. He's spitting. So narrator Frank then says, cool, I stand corrected. And then he, as the narrator notes, that he feels as queasy as Percy after hearing about this fake ding-dong. Iris suggests that Frank try one, especially since he's lactose intolerant, which I don't know how milk factors into a ding-dong, maybe in the cream, but I feel like that they wouldn't have genuine, like real cream inside of a ding-dong.
But also she did not mention that they're dairy-free.
That's true. Was that not there? Let's see the list. Gluten-free, no sugar added, vitamin-enriched, soy-free, goat and milk seaweed-based. I guess maybe but it's
Doesn't goat milk also have lactose?
I'm not sure. I'm fortunate enough to be very tolerant of lactose.
I just choose not to drink lactose.
I like
Some
it.
may call that lactose intolerance. I call that a choice. A voluntary choice that has nothing to do with my body's ability or inability to process lactose.
Frank then asks how she knew he was lactose intolerant, and she says that she learns a lot by being the messenger goddess. She then says that monsters could use healthy snacks for a change since their diet is mostly junk food and heroes. Percy struggles to get up and asks if Iris will help stop the army marching south. She explains that she is nonviolent, so she will act in self-defense but not be drawn into attacks. And then she says that she's been reading about Buddhism and Taoism. And Hazel brings up what we're all thinking. Aren't you a Greek goddess? Iris scolds Hazel for putting her in a box, stating that she will not be defined by her past, which I think is very funny. And there's a couple of things in these chapters where a very valid question is raised, and then rather than answering it, because I think it would get too messy, Rick just has the character go, nah, and move on. And I support it. Mm-hmm. Hazel then replies, okay, could you at least help our friend here? I think he's sick. Percy asks if they can send an Iris message. Frank doesn't know what that is. Iris can tell that Juno is up to some shenanigans then if we've got mixing
Chiron's gotten to everyone.
Greek and Roman people. Yep. Fleecy and Iris then exchange looks. Iris sprays a vial around Percy's face, quote, to balance his chakra. And then she explains an Iris message to the Romans. And she asks Fleecy to set one up. Stunning that of all the granola hippie jokes that get made in this section, not a single yoga joke. That was wild to me. Wild. Iris then winks at Frank and tells him to keep it on the down low, but Fleecy handles most of the messages these days because she's adept and Iris simply doesn't have the time. It also messes up her wah, and Frank asks what I'm wondering, what is a wah? But Iris does not answer. And I love this as the classic, like, delegate but don't tell that I'm the one to. It's like how Hans Zimmer doesn't actually do all of the music when it says Hans Zimmer is the composer.
Oh, really?
On him. No, it's like a team of people. It's actually like a really unfair thing. It's like the entire orchestra or whatever, but because he's in charge of it, it's just credited to him, even though there's like 50 people.
It's like Jeff Koons. He doesn't do any work.
Who's he?
Oh, he makes those giant like metal balloon animal sculptures.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he doesn't make any of his work. He's just like the head of creative and he comes up with the ideas, but he has a whole team of like hundreds of artists who get no credit. And I'm Jeff Koons' #1 hater.
Good. Also gross to not credit. I love crediting. That's why I always have the credits at the end where I credit everyone who does anything. Like, everyone deserves credit. So I credit the live show. I like give hype to all the people behind it. Like, there needs to be more crediting of people making things possible. Podcasting is getting better at it, which makes me happy. Like, a lot of those like big budget podcasts are finally saying who produces and edits and researches and does all the other stuff that goes into it. Makes me very happy. But yeah, we need to get better at crediting. Movie credits are already 1,000,000 years long. Why not list everybody who's composing the music and doing work besides just Hans Zimmer? Come on. So yeah, anyway, Percy Jackson. Iris does not answer. Instead, she instructs Fleecy to take Percy and Hazel to the back and to feed them and to set up the messages. She identifies Percy's ailment as memory sickness, sparked by him meeting Polybites and being a son of Neptune. Iris then says, Fleecy, give him a cup of green tea with organic honey and wheat germ and some of my medicinal powder #5. It being #5, I could only think of, this is medicinal powder #5. Hazel asks, what about Frank? Iris tilts her head like she's studying Frank and says, oh, don't worry. Frank and I have a lot to talk about. And that's the end of chapter 21, which I have retitled ROFL. Do you have a retitling of chapter 21?
I have We Meet the World's Most Dedicated Vegan Influencer. I also was trying to make a ROFL joke and I couldn't come up with a good... I was trying to do like, I accidentally ROFL at the ROFL, but I couldn't get a good acronym for ROFL that wasn't very clunky.
Or it could be like a 4-word title that is ROFL. So like running.
The closest thing I could come up with was ruining obnoxious feng shui layouts.
That's good because they talk about that happening.
It feels a little clunky. I don't know.
No, I like that. That's a good one. What's another? Because it's like retail oriented friend liaison. Like we're meeting a new friend in a store. Something like that. I like that. ROFL, but it stands for something else. All right, we're going to take a break here for the Son of Fortune, and then we will come back to do as many more chapters of this as time allows. Hello and welcome to the Son of Fortune, technically Shubio edition in terms of recording, but ideally Baltimore edition in terms of uploading this. I'm recording this on Saturday before leaving for our Sunday Baltimore live show. And then ideally I will be posting this episode at some point on Sunday before the show so that I don't have to work on the train ride home. Instead, hopefully I can just sleep on that Monday morning train. But I am excited for some updates. So let's give you those updates first. Even though now this will be in the past by the time you're hearing this, shout out and thank you to everyone who came to our Baltimore show show. If you missed it and you are somewhat nearby, we've got a show that's somewhat nearby in Richmond, Virginia on February 23rd with Johnny Frolickstein. We're going to be covering chapters 35 and 36 of The Son of Neptune, and then we'll also have a Potterless portion as well, so that'll be fun. But we've got a bunch of shows upcoming on the schedule. We've got a show in Houston, March 9th. We've got a whole bunch of Midwest shows in April, and also I will be in Buffalo and Montreal in May. If you want to get tickets to all these shows, you can go to thenewslumpian.com/live. I'm going to try to get one of those Midwest shows streamed, so stay tuned for that. And also stay tuned. I'm working on adding more dates in June and in August. I've mentioned those on a recent Patreon Q&A live stream about what those potential cities could be, but I don't want to say exactly what it is until things are confirmed. But things are in the works. Hopefully I'll have new dates to announce. But something I do have to announce right now, I mentioned it earlier, but Potterless, a show that I did for many, many years, I posted a new episode of it. I post them from time to time from past live shows, and I posted an episode of me, my sister Megan, and my niece Aurora discussing our favorite characters from the Lego Harry Potter video games. We did it at a live show in Dallas in October of 2022, so a blast from the past, but that is available on the Potterless feed. And if you are a patron, you can listen to the ad-free version on Patreon. Now, speaking of the Patreon, I want to give a shout out to the folks who have joined the Patreon most recently. Shout out to our newest Super God tier patron, Cassidy Jennings. Shout out to our newest God tier patron, TJ. And shout out to our newest Demigod tier patron, Kari. Thank you so much for your support. May Hypnos bless you that if you are trying to sleep on a mode of transportation after a weekend of work, that you are able to sleep the whole time and you feel nice and refreshed. And also one other thing about the Patreon that I don't talk about often, just to let you know, in addition to signing up for a monthly pledge, you can sign up for a yearly pledge and you get 15% off whatever it is. So if you feel like you are going to be committed to the Patreon perks for a while, you can lock in for a full year. You also could do a month, decide, oh, this is super cool. I would love to lock in for a full year. And then you can lock in for a full year and save on the Patreon price. Pretty sweet. Also, just a scheduling note for what lies ahead. On March 3rd, I'm going to take that Monday off. March is a 5-Monday month. We've not taken a week off yet during 2025, so that is the right timing to do so. I have spaced things out in 2025 so that I will be taking 6 weeks off. So there are 4 5-Monday months in every year, and then I wanted to do another 2 because basically, I'm looking at the math, it basically means every 60 days I get a week off, which is quite crucial now with the baby. So the first of those is going to be March 3rd. And as a reminder, you can always go to thenewslumpian.com/about, and I always have what lies ahead for the next 4 weeks, including what chapters we'll be covering on the podcast. Now, if you're all caught up on the New Slumpian and you're looking for new content to consume and you've listened to my other podcasts and that is just not enough, well, that is also where the Patreon can come into play. I post bonus episodes. I post Q&As where we do live streams. People submit questions. We talk in the chat and stuff. I do director's commentaries where I give you behind the scenes peeks as to what went into the episode you're listening to, what is down the road, what live shows are coming up. I do a lot of them as I am doing grocery store runs with my daughter in the stroller. So every now and then you get very cute baby babbling in the background. Pretty sweet stuff. That's all available on the Patreon. So if you're looking for some new stuff in between episodes of TNO, if you're all caught up, you are in luck because you can get that at thenewslumpian.com/Patreon. Now, unless you're listening on Patreon, where you get access to ad-free episodes, you're going to hear words from a few sponsors to make it feasible for me to be a full-time podcaster. Some of those ads will be read by me, and others of them won't be. The ones that aren't read by me are inserted locally. So if you live in Equatorial Guinea, don't be surprised if you hear an ad in Spanish, French, or Portuguese, all listed as official languages. But once those ads are complete, we'll get back into this episode of The New Olympian. And we're back. It's chapter 22. It's called Frank. We'll retitle it. It starts with, quote, Frank would have preferred to go with his friends, even if it meant he had to endure green tea with wheat germ. Classic. Uncle Rick getting in those hippie jokes. No, instead, Iris leads him to a cafe table and says that she knows how he feels and that she imagines that the half-burned stick in his pocket gets heavier every day. And Frank basically goes, what?
How did you know?
She states again that she knows things, especially since she was Juno's messenger for ages. She knows why she gave Frank a reprieve. Frank asks, what do you mean reprieve? And brings out the stick. Iris explains that Juno saved Frank for a reason, to fit into her great plan. She says that he would have died if not for her, as he was born with too many gifts, and, quote, that sort of power tends to burn out a mortal life. So, very intrigued about Frank's backstory here. Frank doesn't think he has any gifts, let alone too many. Iris tells him that's not true, and then she makes a tiny rainbow appear with the wave of her hand. It's a vision of him playing in his grandmother's backyard at age 4. In the past, he wanders towards the woods and is confronted by a grizzly bear. Frank's memory of this was so hazy that he questioned whether or not it actually happened, but now that he sees this happening, he goes, oh, okay, that must be real. Then Frank's mom, who was in the attic previously, puts herself between Frank and the bear, who is staring at Frank, and narrator Frank notes there's no way that she could have gotten there fast enough. It feels impossible. So maybe there is some magic afoot. I'm wondering if she has some sort of magic powers to her. Is Frank godly on more than one side? Is that what we're talking about here with the multiple gifts? We will just have to see. Frank's mom tells Frank to go inside the house. He does, and when he turns around, he sees that the bear is gone. He asks what happened, and his mom replies, Mama Bear just needed directions. And at this point, I'm wondering, is Frank part bear or something? What's going on here? Is this a relative? What's happening? So the scene then changes to Frank at age 6. He's resting in his mother's lap, even though he's quite big to do that. She is telling him stories about heroes and, quote, pretending that they are all related to Frank. She then tells the tale of Zhu Fu, who searched for the elixir of life, and says that he was Frank's great with 12 greats grandfather. Then tells him the tale of Sung Guo. I thought this is why you picked this chapter.
It was, but it was also, I loved the ROFL copter stuff. It's so funny.
2 reasons. My last name and a teenage boy joke.
Yeah, when I read this as a kid, I was like, oh my God, am I related to Frank? Am I really a demigod?
I love it.
But also Frank's Canadian.
It.
I was like, I'm not Canadian though, so I don't know. But as a kid, I was like, yes. I've been name dropped.
Oh, I love it. So yes, tells him the tale of Sung Guo, aka Seneca Gracchus, who defeated 12 Roman dragons and 16 Chinese dragons in the Chinese Western deserts. I didn't know Roman dragons were a thing, so this is very fascinating to me. His mom said that Sung Guo was the strongest dragon of them all, which is how he could beat them. Now I'm wondering, is Frank part dragon? What's going on here? She continues that his oldest ancestor that they know of was the Prince of Pylos, who fought Hercules and lost, but put up a good fight. She compares it to fighting a swarm of bees, and now I'm wondering, is Frank part bee? What's happening? Narrator Frank then says, quote, the comment made no sense to Frank, then or now. His ancestor had been a beekeeper? Great. Current Frank thinks that he hasn't thought about these stories in years, and seeing his mom makes him want to go back to this time. Flashback Frank asks his mom where his family is from. Is it Pylos or Rome or China or Canada? And she answers Lijian and reminds Frank that he has a special gift and he can be anything. So now because of all the other things, we've got bear, dragon, bees, I actually have more of a refined guess. Is Frank some sort of shapeshifter? Like when you wild shape in Dungeons and Dragons or Baldur's Gate 3, like does he have some sort of ability where he can turn into creatures of other sorts? Is he like Ben 10? Is he an animorph? Is there some sort of thing where Frank can turn into other beings? Obviously, you can't say anything because the trapdoor's got to stay intact. And if you fall down the trapdoor, who's going to edit the podcast? Me? Oh, it takes so much time. The rainbow then dissolves. Frank says that he doesn't understand. Iris says that his mom nailed it on the head. He can be anything. And that really lends itself to shapeshifting.
However, whenever I hear the phrase, you can be anything, I think of this one Dance Moms episode where Abby Lee Miller pits the 2 girls, Maddie and Chloe, against each other with the same solo. And the song's called You Can Be Anything. But the way she pitches the names of the solos are Be Anything and You Can. And then when you see the dances on stage, the song goes You Can Be Anything. And that's where my brain goes.
Okay.
Don't know why.
I don't know much about Dance Moms. That's where JoJo Siwa got her start, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's like the one thing I know about it.
I had a big Dance Moms phase, and for some reason, a lot of those episodes are just burned into my brain.
Yeah, for me, it's more of I did dance. I felt the wrath of Dance Moms because I did like a boys hip hop group. My sister was in this like very competitive dance academy in New Jersey that like competed at all these competitions and stuff, like super intense kind of stuff. My sister went on to minor in dance in college, so like a legit program. They opened up a all boys hip hop class for basically all of the girls dancers, brothers and stuff like that. There were some boys in the company, but like not many. And I joined the hip hop thing. And then in my second year, they took me and 2 other guys, like the best 3 dancers from it. And we did a trio, and like doing a trio or a solo or a duo or a smaller group as opposed to just like the big thing. It was like a huge deal. And the dancer moms got so mad that they picked the boys just because they're boys, which is definitely why we got chosen. But we were also very good, and we did a routine of Missy Elliott's Gossip
That was
Folks.
a whole plot in Dance Moms.
I mean, yeah, they like I remember like getting dirty looks from grown women 40-year-old women shooting me dirty looks and saying things about me behind my back that I could hear because they were so mad about this. I was 11
I had
years
no
old.
decision making in this.
That's the whole thing. I was like, I didn't do this. Like, I was just, I'm sorry for being good. But then there was like even more drama because we competed in a competition called Teen Miss Dance of New Jersey, which was great. And we absolutely nailed our performance. And there was this duo of girls that did a thing to me and my shadow, and one was dressed in black and one was dressed in white. And the whole thing was they're supposed to be in sync, but they were like slightly off by a half a step. And they were like the pride of the dance company. And they were like also our age. So all the dance moms were like rooting for them to kick our ass in the solo, duo, trio. I think just maybe like small groups, maybe like duos and trios, whatever it was. They were all like rooting for them to like make us look bad. And then we ended up winning a gold medal at Teen Miss Dance of New Jersey and not them. It was wild. And like there was so much drama that happened just because like me and my two friends happened to be good at dance. It was ridiculous. I do have the video of one of our performances. I'll have to post that at some point. And it's like, it's a good routine. It's a good routine. Also, I remember our teacher, Christina, explicitly saying when we were doing the dance, you are not allowed to look up the lyrics of Missy Elliott's Gossip Folks, because we did it to like a clean one. And I remember at one point suggesting like, oh, should I look up the lyrics? Because a lot of our moves were like, when she says this, you do this. When she says this, you do this. And she was like, you are not allowed to look up the lyrics.
What I find really funny about clean edits of songs is that in today's day and age, what kid is just going to follow that?
Yeah.
It's so easy. Like Google. In an instant, you can just find the lyrics. Also, sometimes they don't even try when they record a clean version. They just like say the first syllable and it's like, what are we really covering up here?
It was definitely better in the past, especially because like you had to like really go on the internet to like search up the dirty lyrics. And like, I don't know, my parents like checked my internet history when I was, using the big family computer in 5th grade. They would like make sure I wasn't getting into trouble. And then the other thing is because streaming wasn't really a thing, you would have to buy the explicit version. And at least in my situation,
put it on a CD player.
Yeah, like if you're buying the CD, your parents are probably buying it. They're buying the clean version. Unless you have like an iTunes gift card or something and your parents let you like go wild with it, which they did. So they never like checked, but I guess I was just such a like goody two-shoes kid that I always bought the clean versions. Like if your parents are paying for the clean version, you're not going to like go out of your way to spend 99 cents on the explicit version. So yeah, but now these days, like it's so much easier. Though by default, my smart speaker sometimes will play the clean version of a song. I'm like, how old do you think I am? Sonos, come on.
I remember when one of the Taylor Swift albums came out, for some reason, the default one on Spotify played the clean one, and it happened for a lot of people. So for a while, I was like, I thought this album was explicit. I'm not hearing a single swear word. And then I realized I listened to the whole thing, the clean version. I was like, oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But then like on Twitter, everyone was like, did anyone else get showed only the clean version? What's happening here?
Wild times. Anyway, Percy Jackson. So narrator Frank about where even were we? Oh, being anything. Narrator Frank says, quote, it sounded like one of those stupid things parents say to boost your self-esteem. A worn out slogan that could be printed on Iris's t-shirts right along with the goddess is alive and my other car is a magic carpet. But the way Iris said it, it sounded like a challenge. Frank insists that he cannot be anything because he has no skills. And Iris asks him, yeah, okay, what have you tried? Because you tried being an archer, which you're not a descendant of, and you're pretty good at that. So why don't you just try more stuff? She says that Hazel and Percy are stretched between Greek and Roman worlds, but Frank is stretched more than either of them. So his mother's whole thing about his family being from all over could be legit. She explains that his family is ancient with blood of Pylos on his mother's side, and then his dad is literally Mars. And now at this point, I got to ask Dr. Moy about Pylos, because that feels very interesting with the Prince of Pylos and the Argonauts and all that. Iris thinks that it's obvious why Juno wants Frank as one of the 7, but she asks, what do you want, Frank? And Frank says that he has no choice. He's the son of the war god, so he's got to go on this quest. And Iris points out that he says that he has to, not that he wants to. And she likens it to her history. She was everyone's errand girl. She grew tired of it, but eventually she started ROFL, and now she is free. She suggests that Frank let go, even if he cannot escape fate. And he adds that his wooden stick will burn at some point, and she foresees that he will be holding it when it happens. My thought on the percentage chance that Frank gets out of this series alive is very low. I do not think he's got a good shot. Someone is going to die with a final breath, and then foes are going to bear arms to the doors of death. More and more with each chapter, I worry that Frank is going to die. So I don't know. We'll have to see. She says that this makes Frank's life more precious, and she encourages him not to simply become the man his family expects. She calls for him to forge his own path. Narrator Frank says, quote, Frank thought about that. The idea was thrilling. Reject the gods, his destiny, his dad. He didn't want to be a war god's son. His mother had died in a war. Frank had lost everything thanks to a war. Mars clearly didn't know the first thing about him. Frank didn't want to be a hero, which feels very Percy Jackson coded. He asks Iris, why are you telling me this? And asks if she wants him to abandon the quest and let Camp Jupiter fall and to betray his friends. She replies that she cannot tell him what to do, but she encourages him to do what he wants, not what others want of him. She says that serving others for 5 millennia did her some harm. No one gave her a sacred animal. No one makes temples for her. So she blazed her own trail and created the co-op. And she offers for Frank to stay with them and become a ROFL copter. No way, Rick. No way. Become a ROFL copter, Rick. That's nothing. Because Frank even asks, oh, what now? And then she just goes, the point is, you have options. Like, what? How does it's not? It's like, I guess because it's close enough to co-op, but like, come on.
This is giving huge MLM energy.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Like,
yeah,
join my vegan influencer cult.
Become a ROFL
Reject your path. Choose your own. We'll go down sunshine and rainbows. You'll recruit more. We can stray more demigods from the murderous path of being a hero.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. The other thing that's wild is ROFL copter. Like, Iris is thousands of years old. How does she know ROFL copter lingo? I guess maybe she's the messenger goddess, so she took fascination in the phrases kids are using these days. I don't know. Wild to me. Wild to me. Anyway, she asks Frank if freeing Thanatos will be good for him and his family and his friends. This causes Frank to remember that his grandmother had said she has an appointment with death. He thinks Thanatos being chained up would keep her alive. He also thinks that Hazel would be able to stick around. And then he thinks that he might even be taken by Thanatos, since all that keeps him from death is a half-burned stick. So Iris, I'm wondering at this point, is she being slightly evil, or is this more of just, okay, I guess she was a minor god that was kind of pushed out by the Olympians, so maybe she is not necessarily on the, yeah, you gotta save Olympus train of thought. Frank imagines life as a ROFL copter, thinking of his mom telling him that he can be anything. But then he thinks that he cannot be so selfish. He says, quote, I have to go. It's my job.
How Roman of him.
How Roman of him indeed. Iris sighs and says that she figured he would choose that path. She says that she will at least help him find Thanatos. Frank asks if she knows where the giants are hiding him. And she says no because of the whole Alaska god thing. But she knows of someone who would know, the seer Phineas, who is blind but can see the past, present, and future. Frank feels like there's a story about this guy that he's heard. Iris confirms and says that in the past he committed horrible crimes and used his gift of sight for evil. Jupiter sent the Harpies to plague him, and she begins to say that the Argonauts, including his father, the Prince of Pylos, drove away the Harpies in exchange for Phineas's help. She states that Frank must learn of Phineas's gift and story on his own. And of course, Phineas is in Portland, Oregon. How convenient, right on the way up to Seattle where they're already headed. She makes Frank promise not to kill the Harpies. If they still plague Phineas, she wants Frank to win his help by some other means, because the Harpies are not evil, and they are in fact her sisters, which surprises Frank. And Iris says, I know, I don't look old enough to be the Harpy's sister, but it's true. Great.
It's all that like vegan skincare and stuff she's doing.
Eating healthy.
De-agifying.
Yeah, it's working. She adds that there's more trouble. If he plans to leave, he must defeat the basilisks on the hill. She explains that basilisk means little crown, which she says is, quote, a cute name for something that is not very cute. She would prefer that they not die since they are living creatures, and she warns that bad things would happen if his friends try to defeat them because only Frank can kill them. Frank asks how. Iris looks at his spear and says that she wishes there was another way, like if he had weasels. So I'm thinking, okay, Frank, you can be anything, turn into a giant weasel. But Frank replies, fresh out of weasels, which is great. Iris says that he'll have to use his father's gift then. Frank asks how to use the spear. Iris says that he must learn on his own because she cannot advocate violence. And in a very interesting turn, she sends Frank off to battle while she tends to Hazel and Percy. I didn't think that he would get sent off alone to do it. I thought it would be, they're all leaving, but he kind of has to lead the charge. So she says, you go do this, I'll worry about them. Then says, quote, I hope Fleecy found the right medicinal herbs. The last time we had a mix-up, well, I don't think those heroes wanted to be daisies. I'm sorry, what? Iris gives a final piece of advice. Since his destiny is to die holding the stick, he could give it to someone that he trusts. Frank asks if she's offering to do so, and she says, oh, no, not me. It would get lost with all my other trinkets. She suggests a demigod friend close to his heart. So obviously that's Hazel. Narrator Frank confirms. Hazel, Frank thought immediately. There was no one he trusted more. But how could he confess his secret if he admitted how weak he was, that his whole life depended on a half-burned stick? Hazel would never see him as a hero. He'd never be her knight in armor. And how could he expect her to take that kind of burden from him? Frank, come on. She is not going to think worse of you because of this.
She's
got
back
a
from
wild
the dead.
history.
Like,
yeah, dude. She's lucky to be here at all. Come on, man. Frank puts the stick away and thanks Iris. She squeezes his hand and tells him not to lose hope. She says that rainbows always stand for hope. Frank says that he'd rather have a few weasels, then picks up his spear and marches towards the basilisks to face them. So I have retitled chapter 22, I Stare at a Bear. How have you retitled this one?
I have two options. I have a sincere one and I have a funny one.
Go for it.
The sincere one is somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, and so can I.
Great. Love it.
And then a vegan cult attempts to recruit me.
Chapter 23 begins with Frank missed his bow. He wants to just shoot the snakes with exploding arrows, easy peasy. But, quote, unfortunately, a quiver full of arrows wouldn't do Frank much good if he couldn't shoot them. Yeah, dude, you kind of need a bow. He also doesn't know where the snakes are because they stopped spewing fire once he stepped outside. He, in general, just doesn't like close-range combat because he feels like he is slow and bulky. He thinks, yeah, I did okay in the war games, but this is not a game anymore, so I'm scared. He thinks again of you can be anything, and again, I'm really feeling like he's got to be a shapeshifter of sorts. And then he thinks that he would like to be good with a spear, immune to poison, and immune to fire. But the spear still feels wrong in his hand, so he doesn't think that his request was answered. He thinks back to the stories that his mother told him about the heroes who battled Hercules, and he struggles to grasp, one, how he could come from that line, and two, how his family went from Greece to the Roman Empire to China to Canada. He begins to wonder about the Prince of Pylos, whatever his great-grandfather Shen Lun did, and whatever his family powers could be. Quote, the gift has never kept our family safe, his grandmother once told him. And Frank thinks, that's very reassuring right now.
First you give me this, life stick. And now you're telling me your gift won't save you anyway.
And if anything, it's more of a death stick, really.
Yeah.
It's not a good gift to receive. So yeah, not a good gift. His other gift isn't good. Terrible. So he inches downhill through the smoke that has billowed up because of all of the burning grass and stuff, and he sees a burst of flame. He thinks about throwing his spear, but then he realizes, I would then be weaponless. So instead, he proceeds closer. He wishes that he had the Gorgon's blood vials, but they're in the boat. Of course they are. But then he thinks, it doesn't matter because one, do they even work on basilisk venom? Two, would I even pick the right vial? And three, would I even have the time to do it because my bow disintegrated very quickly? I like that this chapter is just Frank constantly thinking of things in sets of 3. Soon, he finds himself face to face with a basilisk, and he thinks how he thought they were going to be giant dragon-like monsters, obviously before seeing them, but he thought basilisk meant this big monster that can petrify you. Yes, he did. He read the Chamber of Secrets. He's like, that was the second book. I'm in the second book. But then he thinks further about it, and he thinks, man, if they were bigger, I think I would be less scared of them. Something being so small and quick is hard to hit. And he then is confronted by this snake. It stares at him with its yellow eyes, and Frank wonders, why hasn't it attacked yet? His spear feels cold and heavy, and the dragon tooth tip begins to point downwards, seemingly on its own. Frank tells it to stop, and then he notices the other two slithering towards him. Quote, Frank had walked right into an ambush. That's the end of chapter 23. I have retitled it, I Walk Right Into an Ambush. Do you have a retitle?
Nice. I lose a staring contest with a snake.
Very good, very good. All right, let's do chapter 24 and then get out of here. It's called Frank. It begins with, quote, Frank swept his spear back and forth, just like he's Willow Smith. Stay back, he yells, but he notes as the narrator that his voice sounded squeaky. He continues, I've got, amazing powers and stuff. Well, you tell him, Frank. Yeah. Narrator Frank then says, the basilisks hissed in a 3-part harmony. Maybe they were laughing. Very good. And then what's very interesting is the tip of his spear is at the point where it's almost too heavy to lift, like it's trying to go into the ground. This sparks Frank to remember that the tip is a dragon's tooth, and there's some story about planting dragon's teeth to grow monsters. And yes, we have seen this in the Titan's Curse, and we've also talked about this, I think, in the most recent Dr. Moya episode. So definitely a thing that I was clued into. The snakes circle him, which Frank thinks is either them hesitating or being dumbfounded because of how thick Frank is being. Frank decides to thrust the spear into the ground, and he hears a crack. And when he pulls it out, the tip is gone, leaving him just with a golden stick. He's upset, but come on, man, this definitely means it's working. He considers bringing out his death stick because if he's going to die, he might as well go out in a blaze of glory and save his friends by taking the basilisks with him. The ground rumbles, dirt scatters about, and then a skeletal hand bursts through the ground. The basilisks recoil in fear, and Frank gets it because he too is scared by the human skeleton emerging from the earth. And it legitimately turns into one of those dudes from the Titan's Curse. Camo gear, gray, translucent, goopy skin, and everything.
Yep.
It then turns to Frank, and because it's like a see-through head, you just see the skull grinning, I guess, grin in quotation marks, at Frank, and then it just kind of waits, and Frank realizes, oh, it's waiting for orders. So then Frank goes, kill the basilisks, not me, which is a great thing to add. The skeleton then strangles one snake despite it burning its gelatinous gray flesh. And then another snake lunges, but Frank is able to bash it with the butt of his spear. And then the third snake spews fire at the skeleton warrior, but he just proceeds through it and crushes it under his boot. Frank then turns to the remaining snake, the one that he bashed, and sees that his spear is steaming but not dissolving. Narrator Frank says, quote, the skeleton warrior's right foot and hand were slowly dissolving from poison. His head was on fire, but otherwise he looked pretty good. And I like that narrator Frank has some jokes. He's got some humor too, which makes me very happy.
Especially when he's like in the middle of a fight.
Yeah, he's good. He's able to recognize the humor in the situation. As the narrator, it's great. The snake tries to flee, but the skeleton then pulls out one of its own ribs and throws it at the snake, impaling it into the ground, which is intense. And to make things even more intense, it marches over to the snake, pulls the rib out, and then uses it to cut off the head of the snake. And then to make it even more intense, he goes to the other two snakes and decapitates them for good measure. And then he kicks all of their ashy pile of former bodies about. And Frank realizes, oh yeah, he's trying to make it so that either they can't reform or it takes them longer to reform.
Oh, I thought it was like basilisk repellent.
Oh.
More common. They're like, ooh, some of our friends died, and they like slither away.
I thought this, Frank explicitly says he remembers the Gorgons, they got in the river and they couldn't reform. So I think that's what it is. But I also do like it being a warning of like, everyone stay away. I guess in case Polybites threw more snakes out of his hair on the way out, like just in case they need backup. So the skeleton warrior walks up to Frank and Frank asks, what? What are you? Thinking that he would also like to add, please don't hurt me. I was guessing that the skeleton was just going to salute at him, and that's exactly what the skeleton does. It salutes, and then it begins to crumble and sink back into the ground, but then Frank goes, wait, I don't even know what to call you. Toothman? Bones? Gray? And the narrator Frank says, quote, as its face disappeared beneath the dirt, the warrior seemed to grin at the last name. Or maybe that was just its skeletal teeth showing. Then it was gone, leaving Frank alone with his pointless spear. So Frank decides on Gray. Then he begins to be sad at his seemingly worthless spear, but a new tooth is reforming. He then remembers that Mars said you get 3 charges out of it, so use it wisely. So clearly he can use this cool new spear version of Danse Macabre from Baldur's Gate 3/D&D. He can use that 2 more times and summon a monster. It's a spell where you can make 4 zombies fight for you.
Okay.
Frank heard...
Thank you for explaining.
I'm almost done with the game and I'm like really invested now. Frank then hears footsteps behind him. Percy and Hazel run into the clearing. Percy looking better, except that he is carrying a, quote, tie-dyed man satchel from ROFL. Definitely not his style. I don't like, do satchels get to the point where we need a man satchel and a woman satchel? I thought a satchel is just a satchel.
I feel like this was also around the time when they were like, men can have bags too, but it has to have man on
man
it.
purse.
Like, body wash for men.
Yeah, this is definitely the era when Dove Care for Men came out because I guess not smelling like butt was not manly. I can't use Dove soap. I need Dove for Men soap. Unironically, their deodorant is very good and I still use it. But now it's called like Dove Men Plus Care because now we can be sensitive men who care about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So
now men
weird.
are allowed to do skincare.
Yeah, now we can. It's okay. Yeah. Gosh, we don't just rub dirt on our face. So Percy also has Riptide. Hazel's got her Spatha drawn. Hazel asks Frank if he's okay. And then Percy looks all around for enemies and explains that Iris said that Frank was out here battling the basilisks by himself, and they were like, quote, what? So we came as fast as we could. He asks what happened. Frank just says, I'm not sure. Hazel then goes to the dirt near where Gray had formed and then went away, and she senses death. She says that either her brother has been here or ... the basilisks are dead. And then Percy stares in awe at Frank, surprised that he could have killed them all, and asks him, you killed them all? Frank does a big and then narrator Frank says, quote, he already felt like enough of a misfit without trying to explain his new undead minion. 3 charges. Frank could call on Gray twice more, but he'd sense malevolence in the skeleton. It was no pet. It was a vicious undead killing force barely controlled by the power of Mars. Frank got the feeling it would do what he said, but if his friends happened to be in the line of fire, oh well. So that's a very interesting thing. It's like when you have a Charizard, but you don't have enough badges to control it. Like, you got to really be careful. So Frank thinks, okay, if I do this, I got to be quick with the directions. I got to make sure I'm very clear and it doesn't hurt my friends. He then thinks to how Mars told him that the spear would give him a bit of breathing room until he learned how to use his mother's talents. So now I'm very intrigued to see what his mother's talents are. Frank is now thinking, all right, I only got 2 more charges of this thing, so I got to learn my mother's skills fast. And then he grumbles, thanks a lot, Dad. And then Hazel goes, what? I like someone finally hearing grumbling. I feel like in the Percy Jackson books, we get a lot of muttering and mumbling and grumbling. So for someone to actually hear it for once is nice. Hazel then asks Frank if he's okay. And we conclude the chapter with, quote, I'll explain later, he said. Right now, there's a blind man in Portland we've got to see. Yeah! And that's the end of chapter 24. Oh, very, very good. Very, very good. Do you have a retitling of chapter 24?
I have a couple. None of them I feel like are that good, but I kind of like Dragon Tales.
Oh,
just vague. But also, I love Dragon Tales, the show. So
yeah.
But also, Bones versus Basilisks.
Ooh, that's good. That's good. I have gone with a twist on Greek mythology and called it I Meet the Gray Brother instead of the Gray Sisters.
Yeah, I could not figure out a gray pun.
I've done it. This is why I'm here. Well, Sherry, thank you so much for guesting and joining. And I guess in the future, thank you for editing this episode as well. I appreciate you coming on. If people want to find you doing stuff, where can they find you doing stuff?
I don't know when this episode will come out, but maybe it'll come out before the live show that I'll be at.
Yeah, gosh, I don't know. You'll be at the Baltimore live show. If this episode comes out before, come to the Baltimore live show. Sherry will be the guest. If this is after, thank you to everyone who came out to the Baltimore live show.
You can also find me editing the podcast as the podcast ghost.
Yes, the ghost of the podcast.
Ghost of podcast past, present, and future.
Oh, it's about that time. It's about that time. Oh, I got to watch Muppet Christmas Carol. I got to get on it. Oh, my God. Anyway, Sherry, thank you so much for joining. Listeners, thank you for listening. And until next time, when we see whatever the heck is going on with Percy back in the seat as the narrator, until then, I'll Percy you later. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Newest Olympian. This podcast is created, hosted, and produced by me, Mike Schubert. I also run the social media and the website. Our editor is Sherry Guo. The music is by Bettina Campamontes and Brandon Grugel, and the art is by Jessica E. Boyd. If you love the podcast and you just can't get enough, there's a couple of different things you can do. First, you can go to thenewestolympian.com/Patreon. You can join the Patreon, and you can get access to a whole bunch of fun bonus content. You can also follow us on social media. We're at Newest Olympian on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. There's also a subreddit, reddit.com/r/thenewestolympian. And there's also the TNO Discord, which you get access to by joining any TNO tier on the Patreon. You can learn all about the show at thenewestolympian.com, and you can get some sweet TNO merch at thenewestolympian.com/merch. I've mentioned the Patreon, so let's give a shout out to our producer level patrons: Kelsey Gillespie, the Damn Steam Nuggets, Vicky Garcia, Frida Vikstrom, Megan Moon, Sabrina Balsiger, Polly Burge, Nikki Harris, Tatiana Schmidt, Sandra Rose, Josh Sayer, Josh Wilkie, Abby Ryan, Marco Redhouse, Sam Reeby, Mrs. O'Leary, Milo Kim, Sandkoff, Rika, Ryla Matthews, Sky Mallory, Persasabeth, Aiden Parziani, Grace, Ginger Spurs Boy, A Cup of Solace, Bradimus Prime, Skylar Sisters, Scott Sheldon, Sophie, Natanya Page, Ann M. Thayer Cohen, Bella, Percy Jacked Son, Han, Haley Hingelheimer Schmidt, Catherine Sloan, Jessica Phillips, Haley Mary, Jim Jam Koopy, Kit Kat Crumbs, Andrea Not Andrea, and Jordan Ray. If you want to support the show in a non-monetary way, just tell someone about the podcast. It really does help a lot, whether that is you reaching out to someone directly who you think might enjoy the podcast. Maybe they're a big Percy Jackson fan, maybe they've been looking for an excuse to read the books, or if you post about the show on social media, or you leave us a rating and review on whatever podcasting app you're using. Truly, all of these things help. I really appreciate anyone who has done it in the past, and I also appreciate anyone who will do it in the future. But I'm just so thankful that you tuned into this episode, and I hope you tune into our next episode, where we will be covering chapters 25 and 26 with a new guest to the show, Niharika Bhattacharya. But until then, I'll see you later. Hey everyone, how's it going? It's me, ASMR Mike. So here in the Shubio, I have a stack of, it's not Post-it notes, but it looks like a Post-it note stack, but the notes aren't sticky. I really like this because I like to take little notes, but not necessarily stick them on stuff. This one is one that I've had for many, many years, and I actually brought it up from my semi-childhood bedroom, my parents' place in Texas, but I think I had it, I think I even might have moved with it. Like I might have had it in Jersey and then we brought it, or I'm not sure, but regardless, it's this big stack of paper and I'm going to like through it like it's a deck of cards or something in front of the microphone. Thank you so much for listening.